start from the beginning.
Sure thing.
Just take me through the night of the accident. What happened?
Night of the accident. At this point in my life, going back into this time, it's very hard. Reliving that experience multiple times over, telling the same story, and I think about it more and more. I come up with more emotions. With the night of the accident, I have to take you through the beginning of the day because I started off my day as I normally would, but I had a restriction because I tore my ACL in a game at the Spectrum on March 1st. So going through that week, I remember it was just started to snow, so we wouldn't have had practice a couple days after the game. And the physician, the doctors, they ordered an MRI, so I went to that on Wednesday. I believe it was the 3rd or 4th, and they confirmed that I had torn my ACL, my meniscus, a traumatizing accident on the field. I remember my thought process then. I believed that it was like the end of the world. I couldn't see my recovery. I couldn't see me having to come back to professional soccer. So I was broken, but I didn't ever express those feelings to anybody. My brother Anthony was also a professional soccer player at the time. He went through it. So he would always come to me and go, "All right, Maddie." And I was very hesitant to tell him how I really was doing. And I wasn't depressed. I just couldn't wrap my head around the injury. I remember skipping practice on a Thursday for another doctor's appointment. And then Friday morning, we had a run-through of practice because the team was leaving for Baltimore on a Saturday. That Saturday was the 7th, so Friday was the March 6th. This is in 2009. I went to practice as usual, but this time I couldn't perform. I remember walking in the locker room, and this is what I'll never forget, is the looks that imitated the looks after the game. And it was those looks that, "We feel sorry for you, Maddie, but we're glad it's not me." And I remember that because I was in the same position. Guys that had been injured on my teams, you would look at them like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." But deep down inside, you're happy it's not you. And that's the truth. Nobody wants to go through that. But I remember the trainer pulled me aside, he looked at my knee, and he said, "You're not going to be traveling tomorrow, and just recover, and you have surgery next week." And I was able to schedule surgery so quick. From the time of the injury to surgery was 12 days, March 12th. And the only reason was because there was no swelling. Normal swelling after a trauma to that area, especially the knee, it usually takes time, weeks, before the swelling can come down, before they can go into do surgery. My knee didn't swell up, so the doctors were confused, but they said it was like a reverse effect to the trauma. The bones hit after the ligament snapped, and it was in such a state of shock that it was numb, and it didn't swell. And I can almost say that as an analogy to say how I felt after the car accident, the wreck, the fatal recklessness that I called. But I left that facility there, and the time that I left the facility from the time I got to my apartment on City Ave is a blur. And my brother tried to take me out to lunch that day, and I don't even remember the conversation. I remember I was answering phone calls from friends, family, teammates saying, "I'm sorry to hear that. I guess the news had spread that I tore my ACL," and people were supporting me. And I don't even remember one phone call. And I don't even remember what we said. And it was an old high school acquaintance. But I went home and I took a nap. And the thing about me and my brother's relationship, anytime I played with him or against him, we would either meet up, or in North Carolina I stayed with him, and now in Philadelphia I'm staying with him again. So we always had a ritual. His wife would cook for us, a very small meal. We'd stay in the night before, we'd talk about the game, we'd have a nice meal, and we'd go to bed. And this night she was cooking for him for the next day's game, and I couldn't play, so I didn't want to be around it. But I didn't tell him I didn't want to be around it. I just said, "I'm going to go out and eat in the city." And he said, "Hey, Matt, you come home tonight?" I said, "Yeah, I'll be home tonight." Leave the door open. And I left. And I went over into Manioc area, which is outside of where I live, and I met up with a friend, a very good friend. And it's there that we had no plans for the night. And I think that's where we went wrong initially. We had no plans for the night. And we talked about going into the city, going into Manioc, and we decided to go into Center City, Philadelphia, and just park and walk somewhere to eat. But in that process, I drove my vehicle. He had received a call from coworkers saying they were at a happy hour and to come by. We just so happened to be entering on Broad Street near off the off-ramp on the Schuylkill. And we parked and we went up. It was about 5 or 6 o'clock. The time frames are so skewed in my mind. But I sat there in a bar setting happy hour with people drinking, and I wasn't into it. And had they known me, they would have known something was up. It was completely contrary to my personality. Regardless if I was drinking or not, I was still very personable. And I sat there on a stool, and I kept moving my leg, and I kept holding my knee. And they caught on to how I was acting, and they asked their friend to ask me what was wrong. And these are people I didn't know. And he kept saying, yo, you all right? I'm good. His name's Mike. Mike, I'm good. And they kept bringing drinks over, putting them down, and shots. And I wouldn't take any. I was drinking water. We ordered chicken fingers for fries and other appetizers. I remember just eating and thinking, like, what am I doing out? I don't want to be here. I'm not enjoying this. Finally, my buddy got the hint I didn't want to be there. I'd rather go somewhere that I felt comfortable with. So we left there. He left his friends, and we went to another establishment. It was more of not a Temple University bar, which is my alma mater, but it was a bar where a lot of Temple students went. So when I went there, I knew most of the people, and I had seen friends that I hadn't seen since Temple in 2007 that I graduated with. So it was like kind of a reunion, but yet again, the common theme of the night was, sorry to hear about your knee, Maddie. And everywhere I went, no matter how hard I tried to remove myself from that situation in my life, it kept coming up. And it came to a point where I sat in the back of this place called Urban Salon in Philadelphia, and once again, we ordered food. And I still had no idea that I was going to begin drinking at this point. An old friend, old roommate, I came walking in. I had no idea he was even in town. He's from Scranton, Pennsylvania. And he was in town, and he came to this place, and we looked at each other. I got up, and it was like the first time that kind of my spirit rose up within me, and I was happy to see him. And then he brought up my name, and then we sat down in the back. Nobody bothered us. We talked about it. He said, hey, have a drink with me. And I had a drink with him, and I felt comfortable because this is my buddy, and I felt more loose with him. And I think that was the moment that my judgment diminished, and I forgot about my situation and my knee, and I kind of just wanted to enjoy myself now. And one drink led to another at this place, and then finally, it was probably closing in on 11, 12 o'clock, midnight, and we decided to go back closer to my first friend, the friend that I had met up originally to have dinner with, back near his house in Manioc again. And we went to a place called Mad River, and that's where I really got loose because I knew the bartender, I knew the managers there, I knew everybody. I remember standing in the same place, and the crazy thing about it was the bartender had known my older brother, and the relationship that he had with my older brother was through professional soccer. And what comes up is, Maddie, I'm sorry to hear about your knee. And then he tells me, I went through the same thing you went through. I tore my ACL. And it was kind of like a downer on a situation I had put in the back of my mind. And I think that was at that exact moment where I said, you know what, heck with this. And I wasn't thinking about anything else except for myself. There was no thought of, I'm getting drunk, or I'm getting intoxicated, and I shouldn't go somewhere from here. The thought process was, I'm in the now, let me enjoy myself. And once again, the thought process with alcohol in your system isn't right. I'm not properly thinking clearly. And I remember they ordered shots for a large group of people, and before they could even take them, I took them. Before anybody could even see what happened, I took 5 shots. Boom, 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 boom. And then when they looked, they were gone. They didn't know what happened. And I think it was at that point where the intoxication level, it rose. They announced the bar closing. And again, there was no thought process into what I was even doing. Nobody said, Matt, you're too drunk. Matt, you shouldn't do this. I just figured it was normal. I'm fine. I'm standing on my 2 feet. I'm going to leave the bar, get in my vehicle. We're going to go to Atlantic City. And 45 minutes later, the moment seems surreal. Driving on Atlantic City Expressway. I remember going to speed limit. I remember I didn't take the Benjamin Franklin Bridge because of construction. I remember taking the Walt Whitman Bridge. I remember following the traffic flow. Late at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, there's still cars on the Atlantic City Expressway. And it wasn't until I hit about, I think, the milepost 21, where the state police barracks is, where the rest stop is, and then the out ramp joins the Atlantic City Expressway and goes from 3 lanes to 4. And I always jump in that 4th lane. I've driven on the Atlantic City Expressway for soccer my entire life.
The left lane.
I jump into that left lane and I cruise, and I stay in that left lane. There's usually no traffic. But a car was coming out at that exact moment, and he was speeding. And I remember he was probably 3 mileposts ahead of me, 3 mile markers. And I picked up pace, and I accelerated. And I remember looking at my dash and seeing my speedometer go from 80 up into the 90s, and I just didn't look at it again. And I figured if he sees a cop, he's gonna brake, and I'll brake. That's my thought process. And I also knew there was a toll plaza ahead. I remember saying, I gotta slow down anyway. And I'm just cruising. I passed the car in the left inner lane, and as I was getting back into the right inner lane, it happened like that, like the blink of an eye. And I collided into a car that was, I guess, coming into the right inner lane. They were going about 50, I believe, based on the accident reconstruction. They said I was going 100 and some, 102. And it happened so quick. And I remember going into a tailspin and thinking I was going to die, thinking we were going into the woods. We came to a cease. I remember my passenger was screaming and yelling. I remember feeling so calm, I can't explain it to this day. And after the accident, speaking to my passenger about what he felt like he was being pulled by gravity every which way, and he had his seatbelt on. And I didn't have a seatbelt on, and I didn't feel pulled. I felt like something was holding me in. And I know they say, well, you're intoxicated, your body doesn't react as it would as if it wasn't, and I agree with that as well, but not going that fast, not hitting something that hard. And to this day, and I believe it's a miracle, they look at the accident reconstruction, they can't figure it out. We tailspinned apparently, and we hit a patch of guardrail that is nowhere else on Atlantic Expressway. And it's not even that long, maybe 20 yards of guardrail. We hit it, and that's directed us on back onto the road, but we rail slid the guardrail before it dropped us down on all four wheels again. It tore up the wheelbase, it tore up the tires. I mean, the fact that this SUV didn't flip is a miracle. But not only that, as they did the accident reconstruction, they found out that we sliced through a sign, and the sign also took an instrumental part in redirecting us back onto the road. Now this moment happened so quick. I honestly believed the car was broken down in the middle of the road. That's how quick it happened. And that's how shot out I was at the time. Again, panic set in. I think shocking set in on me, but my passenger was throwing up at the time, so I remember catering to him. But after I got done sitting him down and realized what was going on, I had to go back and I heard OnStar talking. So I went back and I spoke to OnStar, and is there an emergency? There's been an accident. I said, yes, an emergency. Response is on the way. Hang tight. And I remember walking to the front of my vehicle, and there was smoking and gasoline, and I looked about 30 yards back, and I saw the vehicle I had struck, and it was flipped over. And then my eyes played the trick on me because I saw 4 males standing around that vehicle, and I believed with all of my being that they were the passengers and drivers, and they were fine. And cars were pulling over, and I didn't want to cross the road, and I figured I'd stay by my vehicle. But the state police barracks was less than a mile. They were there within minutes. And I thought to myself, okay, I just got into a car accident. I'm good, my passenger's good, and I see them, they're good. And I know I'm drunk. The state trooper came over and he put me through all the tests, and I'm not sure how I did. He said I failed most of the tests, but one of the tests was walk the line, and he gave me instructions. Matthew, you gotta count heel to toe, 1 step at a time, count 1 to 10. When you get to 10, count 10 to 1. Heel to toe, stay on the line, hands down your side. Do you understand? Yes, sir. And I went to take 1 step, and I couldn't put all the weight on my bad knee. And I said, sir, I can't do this test. And he said, you know, failure to do a test is admitting your guilt. And I said, yes, sir. I said, but I can't do it. And I tried taking 2 steps, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't put all my body weight on this leg. And he put me in cuffs, drove me to the state police barracks, and they gave me a breathalyzer. At that point, I believe I blew a .21 at that moment. Yet again, I'm still not thinking drastic, tragic. I'm thinking car accident. I'm thinking I got a DUI. I'm thinking my father is going to be so mad at me. And I'm thinking I got to get surgery next week. So I'm all over the place with my thoughts. I'm not thinking that somebody's hurt. I'm not thinking that somebody's dead. And they put me into a cell by myself. I sat there, and I remember thinking to myself, I need to stay clear. I need to stay coherent. I didn't want them walking by and seeing a drunk slob. I was washing my face, and I remember just watching all the activity. It had to have been 3 o'clock in the morning at this point. And after a couple minutes, maybe 10, 15, a lot of detectives and state police were stopping at my cell, and the cell has a glass front. So you can only see that perspective, and you can hear blurred conversation. But I thought it very peculiar that they were stopping and checking in on me. And I'm thinking, why were they checking on me? Because I'm a professional soccer player? Are they checking on me because of who my father is? But yet again, I'm not thinking why they're looking at me. Like, let's see who just was the drunk driver who killed somebody. That thought process is non-existent. The state trooper came and put my phone down in front of my cell. And I remember it was texting, it was ringing, so every time it rang, it lit up, I could see what time it was. Finally, I heard a conversation with dispatch. And the only reason I listened intently was because I heard my vehicle's description. And the conversation that he had with whoever he was speaking to went exactly like this. He said, driver in the black Escalade is in custody. And I listened. He said, accident on the Annex Expressway is being cleaned up this moment. Passenger, or driver, excuse me, in the town and country is deceased. And I remember my heart just dropped into my toes. And I couldn't even understand what that word meant. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I can't wrap my mind around it today, 4 years ago almost. It doesn't make sense. It's a surreal statement that somebody died because of my irresponsibility. So I was like, I didn't believe that. And I kept saying that word in my head, deceased, deceased. What the heck is deceased? What does deceased even mean? About 3 hours later, they had to follow a procedure, take me to the hospital in Atlantic City and take my blood, make sure that I'm fine. And as they took me out of the cell, they cuffed me and they put me into the back seat. I said, excuse me, sir, may I ask you a question? He said, yes, son. So I said, is the driver in my accident dead? He said, I can't answer that question. They'll brief you back at the station. And right there, I knew that what I heard was true. The trip to the hospital was a blur. The doctor took my blood, asked me all kinds of questions. I probably gave them generic answers. Put me back in the state cruiser and then brought me back to the state police barracks. Sat back in the cell for another hour or two. I think it was closing on 11 or noon the next day, and the day would have been March 7th. They took me out of the room, put me in an interview room, and it was there where I met 3 officers of the detective, prosecutor's office, detective, and state police trooper who responded to the accident, young kid. And before I even sat down, they said, Matthew, you need to brace yourself. And I sat down, and I said, I already know, and I lost it. Started crying, weeping. They were very professional. Comforted me, made sure I was all right. This is a hard thing. You have to take us through your entire day. Take us where what you did, what you ate when you woke up, what you said, who you saw, where you went. I took them through everything, and I understood my rights. I knew I had to say a word. They had to take the quarter out. My father raised me to always be responsible, and in spite of your responsibility. So at this point, I knew how to be accountable, and if there was any information I could give them to help out with whatever they were trying to investigate, I was forthright. And it's crazy because you talk to a lot of people say, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have did that. And my lawyer advised against it. And I think about it now, and the fact that I did do that, it spoke volumes because they said certain things not only to me about their appreciation, but they said to my father, they said, listen, we are pleased with the way your son conducted himself. And if that was my boy, I'd be proud. And that statement, my father needed to hear. Coming to pick your son up who just killed somebody, that was God's grace.